Hello, this is Ryan Bonds of the Cleveland Stater. I'm joined today by Dr. Nicolas Zingale, Associate Professor at the Cleveland State Urban Affairs College. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. On October 4th, there's going to be the Humanitarian Engineering Disrupted Communities and Digital Hubs Forum. And you're actually going to be moderating that. And there's going to be countless people coming in from other countries, other schools, and they're going to be talking about how technology sort of affects communities and how you can kind of predict and make sure things are going the right way. Is that about right?
Yeah. I think what we're mainly concerned with is when any community or any society begins to infuse a technology within their social culture, it has the possibility of bringing around great amounts of opportunity, but at the same time, it can be risky. So it creates as many openings sometimes as it forecloses. And the question we have sometimes with technology is, what is occurring when we impose it onto a community that can potentially foreclose upon the very social or cultural influences that are cohesive to a community?
And this is all going to be in the Roberta Steinbacher atrium at the Urban Studies College. So what are some examples in the past of certain technologies that you would probably talk about in this sort of forum?
So you could think about this from a very basic aspect of, let's just say, transportation. The invention of the technology, let's say, of the combustion engine. It forever changed the way that we moved around our communities. And it had an impact well beyond the technology of the combustion engine. It totally changed the way in which we built our cities. We thought about our cities. We moved around our cities. It had impacts environmentally. And so technology always has this ability to change who we are and how we go about doing things, and probably more importantly, how we begin to think about ourselves within that world or within the area of society that we co-inhabit with other things. So when I think about this in the perspective of my kids, I am fortunate to have a couple of daughters that are in their early 20s. They have been raised on, for the most part, since they've been 10, 12 years old, with something in the palm of their hand that has access to virtually, all the information in the world if they know how to use this device. That's changed not only the way that they go about finding out information, but it changes the way they actually understand things, how they go look for information, how they communicate with others. And this has these tremendous social impacts for communities to consider.
I mean, I'm 25, so I grew up in a age of cell phones as well. I have a mini computer in my hand. We're recording this on a phone. 20 years ago, you wouldn't be able to do this. Are you guys going to be focusing on maybe the future of technology and stuff that could be coming? Because I know that you mentioned before that we're going to be talking nationally, internationally, then down into just the city and neighborhoods in general. So how can you learn from other countries and how they might do things generally?
So there's different communities, different societies they're different. They're pluralistic. What that means is that their particular social conditions, their governance structures, even the way that they internalize a capitalistic society has a lot to do with what can work within that particular society. And I would argue that has an impact even what can potentially work in the United States when we get down to the community level, to the street level, to the neighborhood level. Something that works in downtown Cleveland might not necessarily work in rural, Summit County, which is south of us, and it's more of a rural kind of an area. However, there are threads of what we can learn in one area that could help us begin to think about how something can be implemented and used in another area. So we will be having somebody on the panel, Dr. Sasha Dresnik from Croatia, and he has been working a lot with smart cities. And he's looking at this from not just what's happening in Croatia, but also from the perspective of the UN. And not everything that the UN is doing and not everything that they may be doing in Croatia can work on the streets of, let's say, Cleveland, Ohio. But there are threads, and conceptual threads in particular, that might be useful that we can tap into to potentially work within our particular area.
It's more about just seeing what works, throwing things off each other. Is that what a lot of this forum is going to be about, is throwing ideas at each other, seeing what programs are going on and what can be applied? or is it more just a discussion?
So it's going to be a bit more of an open discussion on this because, quite honestly, we don't have a lot of answers of what's going on. We've got some ideas, and one of the things that we've become, or at least me personally, become interested in is to what extent do we experiment on communities with technology? So when you think about Facebook and Twitter, whether we like to think about it or not, it's been one huge experiment.
Yeah.
And some things we've learned from it are good, and some things we've learned from it are bad.
Definitely.
And have impacted the way, and so we've kind of thrown society into a big experimental research project.
Yeah.
But it's not like a controlled environment in a laptop. I mean, these are like real lives and real human beings, and in some cases, a real democracy that might be at stake, right? And so humanitarian engineering and disrupted communities and digital hubs, it is about entering into these kind of technological implementations within communities, but going in from a multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's what's really important here. We need to have people from sociology, from law, from engineering, from biology, from the other hard sciences, to public administration, governance, planning, nursing, the medical field, that begin to think about what might be the impact of doing whatever it is that we're trying to do, because it could have these impacts and these unanticipated consequences that could be detrimental to something that we didn't necessarily think about.
Would you have an example of that in the past?
So there's some hidden examples that aren't really apparent to us, and I'll bring up a hidden one, and I'll bring up one that maybe might be real obvious. Okay. So a hidden one, we have these things called electronic medical records. And these electronic medical records, the intention of this thing was that in the medical field, what we'd be able to do is share this information more easily. So right now, when we did everything by hand, it made it very difficult to share information on you as somebody that was getting care between different doctors that you may actually be receiving care from. However, this has been bridged into certain types of assessment protocols that have been built out of this. Certain types of evidence-based practice. I'm definitely not against evidence-based practice. I think these are things that are very important to what we're doing, and they help us avoid mistakes and those types of things. But we're naive to think that the process of electronic medical records and evidence-based practices encompasses 100% of what a patient might be experiencing. And if we allow the technology to be the lead, and we somehow disrupted to the point in which we no longer have a good interface, a good human interface between a nurse and a patient or a doctor and a patient, to begin to pick up those different signs, those body movements. We call it connaturality, these things that we pick up from one another that you can't necessarily get down on a record. If we're naive to these things, that these things don't really exist, we can potentially make mistakes. Okay? So somebody telling you that I'm experiencing pain somewhere, and you write down that pain, number might actually not allow you to open up to the fact that the reason why that person is having pain is because they're experiencing some kind of social harm at home, let's say, and you may not get that strictly from a form. So expanding this and having these conversations help. The broader example I'll give you is a typical example I think that everybody uses, and this is social media and this whole idea now where we've got kind of digital tribes that have formed, where people only get information from the people that they surround them with that are like thinkers, and it just more and more deeply entrenches people within this. It separates us more. It keeps us from critically thinking and hearing things from different viewpoints, and we reach a point in which we lose the ability to comprehend appropriately biased information as it comes. We begin to perceive it as though it's objective information, when in reality it's just tribal information or digital tribal information that we get. That kind of stuff has an impact on how we vote, how we conceive, how we work with conceive thoughts, and how we work with one another, and ultimately how we govern our communities.
We're going to have more speakers than you and a couple other people you mentioned. Like, there's going to be Kevin Posno, Dr. Kevin Posno from Ohio State coming in, Leon Wilson, who's the Chief of Digital Innovation and Chief Information Officer for the Cleveland Foundation. You mentioned Sasha Drezic, Matt Gray, who's the Chief of Sustainability for the City of Cleveland, James Hay, who's the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Department of Information Technology at Cuyahoga County. Dorothy Bonek, who's the Chief Executive of Digital C. We have all these people coming in. You guys are all going to be running these ideas off of each other, like you just mentioned, like for example, social media and things like the medical field with like, nobody would have really thought about. Like they're like, oh, this is a great technology, like, but then you don't think about the fact that there's issues that come about when you have too much of it in certain places. So like this is all going to go like from, like you said, Sasha Drejic is from Croatia and worked the stuff at the UN, but then you get into like people like James Hay and Matt Gray who are in Cleveland. So when you have this many people like coming through here, is it going to be a really positive thing to have just so many different ideas? Will it change anybody in here's approach, or is this going to be since this is a big forum, are there going to be other people here that are in this field as well that are going to maybe use what you guys talk about as ideas for things that how they're implemented, essentially?
So I think what we're doing is convening a group of people that can continue a conversation or step into an already moving stream of conversation that's going on. So I don't think we're the group that's starting this conversation. I think this conversation has been going on for a long period of time of how do we begin to think about the impacts of technologies on society. And these have been debated for a long period of time. I think what we're attempting to do is to get ourselves focused around the fact that there's a human element that is involved with all of these. And one of the tricky things with technology is that we can become fascinated with the idea that technology can offer us an optimistic upside. And in many cases it does. In a lot of cases it has. But if we don't engage in certain types of conversations, we don't quite understand holistically of what might be going on. So the whole idea of how this is structured, as you mentioned, is to give an overall understanding of how we can begin to conceptualize the human at the center of this, of what's going on, and then begin to say what's happening internationally as we think about this, what's happening nationally, what's happening at the county level, what's happening at the state level, and then ultimately what might be happening at the neighborhood level. And if you look at the panel, we address each one of those scales as we begin to go through. And this kind of alludes back to your previous point. Some of it is going to be backward looking, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about, I suspect, is going to be forward looking. This event is sponsored by the Levin College, but the part of the event is sponsored by the Internet of Things Collaborative, which is a collaborative between Cleveland State University and Case Western Reserve University. And this collaborative is about thinking about our area as a digital hub around the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is really about connecting the way we gather information through sensors or other types of devices, how we communicate that information through an info communication system, and how we analyze that information to ultimately drive decisions and outputs, so that we can either make better decisions or, in some cases, have an artificial intelligence technology that might be making those decisions on our behalf. And if that doesn't make you nervous, it probably should, right? These are things that we have to talk about, though, right? Because they're coming, and they're already in place, and they're already moving ahead.
We already have AIs. So
AI's here, autonomous cars are here, there's sensors all over the place. We're doing facial recognition at all of the borders. The Department of Homeland Security is very entrenched in facial recognition. These things are already occurring, and once again, we're finding ourselves where the technology is racing ahead, and we have to kind of catch up and get our minds around what the impact is to human beings.
Which sounds incredibly interesting. So if you are not busy on October 4th at 4 o'clock, please join these guys at the Roberta Steinbacher Atrium, because this sounds like an incredible event. And thank you for listening to this podcast. Thank you again, Dr. Zingale, for talking to me and taking time out of your day to talk to me about this. It's clear that this is going to be awesome and you're very passionate about this, so I'm excited to see how it goes. So, hey, thanks for listening to the Cleveland Stater, and this is again Ryan Bonds. Have a nice day. Bonds, have a nice day. Bonds.